Hi everybody, this is Steve Manser, and in this Roller tutorial we'll cover task lists. To start off everything, we're going to go through some definitions and context first, and then we'll jump into Roller and actually use task lists to do a few things and see what they can do. Now, a task list is pretty self-explanatory. It's just like a list of tasks you put on a piece of paper and check them off when you're done. Roller's task lists are pretty much the same thing, but you can just do a lot more with them. So they are named lists of tasks. They can be recurring or single instances. You can set due dates and even pre-due dates for individual tasks and for the entire list itself. Now, when a task is completed, it keeps track of who marked it complete and when they marked it as complete. And the same thing for a task list. You can mark the entire task list as being completed, and it keeps track of who marked it as completed and when. Now, if a task list has a due date and it's not marked as completed by the time the due date arrives, you can have Roller send you a notification so you can follow up and keep things on track. And finally, there's a task list report, which lists the name of the task list, all the tasks and all their statuses and who completed them and when. You can use task lists for a few things. First of all, anytime you need validation, the tasks actually get done on time. Another thing is if you need some notifications when things aren't completed on schedule. And finally, if you need accountability for who did what and when, these tasks maintain the information you'll need for that accountability. Now, for all the reasons that I just mentioned, Roller requires that a task list is used to close a financial period. So if your company closes its books every month, you'll need a monthly task list, and closing each monthly instance will be a prerequisite to closing that month's financial period. Task lists are created in two separate phases. First, you create the definition, then you create instances. Now, creating the definitions separate from the instances saves a lot of time, especially where the definitions get reused over time, and also when there's changes that need to be made to the tasks themselves. Either you add or delete, or you modify some task. Each new instance will reflect the changes that have been made to the definition. And we'll see this in the examples that we do in Roller. Whenever we have something that recurs, we need two things in order to figure out when the next instance falls. We need an epoch date and a cycle. The cycle determines how often, whether it's daily, weekly, or monthly. And we need the epoch date for us to determine when the exact next instance is going to be. And depending on how something recurs, we'll need different parts of that epoch date. So for example, if something recurs daily, it will look to the epoch date to find the hour and minute when it should occur. And if it recurs weekly, it will look at the epoch date for the day of the week and the hour and the minute which it recurs. If it's monthly, it will look at the epoch for the day of the month. Now, there's a special thing about the monthly ones. Many months have 31 days. Some months have 30 days. One month has 28 or 29 days, depending on leap year or not. So the question is, what day do you use if you want something to recur at the end of the month or on the last day of the month? So Roller makes this pretty straightforward to figure out how it works. For anything which is based in a monthly cycle, so that means monthly or quarterly, if the date of the epoch is the 28th or later, it's interpreted as the last day of the month. Now, we'll see this in the examples that we work out later, so I'll come back to this when we get there. Now, the last thing to cover before we jump into the program is this attribute of a task called worker. The value of this attribute defines who or what is going to actually do the work. It is our plan over time to add a lot of automatic workers to perform tasks automatically. At the moment, there's only one worker available, and that's called the manual task bot. And basically what this means is that a person needs to do this work. So for tasks like, walk the unit or clean the parking lot or something like that, these are tasks that, at least at this point in time, must be done by a human being. Now, in the future, we may have workers that do things like automatically generate PDF reports of journals and ledgers and store them away on a file server someplace. And workers like that could be set up to run automatically and store the results of when they completed things automatically and that sort of thing. But for now, you'll have to complete the tasks manually. Okay, so we're ready to start. Let's get things kicked off by creating a new task list definition. Now let's suppose that on this property we periodically have an outdoor event that includes a speaker and some number of people. And let's suppose that there's a certain number of tasks that we always do whenever we have an event like this, and we just want to document them and make sure that they all get done so that everything goes smoothly. Now, an event like this does not happen on a regular interval. It happens upon request, so it's non-recurring. So we'll just remove all the dates from this one. Since we don't know what date these events are going to fall on, we'll do the same thing for all the tasks that we add to this list as well. We don't need an email list or anything like that at the moment. Let's go ahead and add some tasks. Maybe the first thing that we want to do is make sure that we set up the chairs. Then we'll set up the risers and put the podium on it. And there's probably a lot of other steps too. I'm not going to list all of them. I think you get the idea. Now that's enough of a definition to work with to get things started here. Let's exit out of this, and now let's go down to the task list and create an instance of this thing. So let's click on Add New, and then we select the task list that we just created outside Event. Don't worry about the start date at this point. So now we have an instance of this task list, and we can do things like go in and click on any one of the tasks here, bring it up. It doesn't have a due date as we said when we defined it. If we actually want to put a due date on there, we can just enter something in. Let's suppose that we need all the chairs up by Saturday the 17th at whatever 10 o'clock in the morning. We can add that date there, and now you'll see that it actually has a due date of the 17th. And when the chairs are all set up, we can come in here and mark it as completed. And now notice that it has a done date, and we can mark the other task as complete as well. Let's do that. Now they're both marked as done. Now one way this could be used is that a manager, for example, could have their staff do all the individual tasks and mark each task as complete as they're completed. And then when the manager is satisfied that everything is done and complete, then they can mark the task list as a whole as completed. Another way to use it is if you're confident that all the individual tasks have been completed satisfactorily, you can just mark the task list as done. And we'll see here in a minute that the completion status of the task list is key. But now I want to show you something else first. Currently there's no due date on this task list, so probably the first thing I would have done actually is come in and set the date when everything had to be done. And we'll say that it had to be done, Friday at 10 a.m. I think is when we said we'll have it all done. So we'll save it like that. Now it shows that this outside event, we have to be through with everything at 10 o'clock. Now I can mark it as complete, and when I do that and save it, you can see that it's shown as completed now. And if we open it back up to look at the details, you can see that it was me that checked it off as done, and it notes the time and date. Now, let's suppose that we thought everything was done, but it really wasn't. We can just uncheck the complete box, save it again, and now it is no longer marked as completed. Now, here's another thing. Let me change the due date to a date and time that's already passed. Now today is November 12th. It's a little past 11:30. So let me mark it as due at 11 o'clock. And now I'm going to add an email address here. So now when I save it, this task list will actually be past due, and it will actually have an email target to notify me that it is past due. And the Roller server checks periodically to see if things like this are overdue. And when it finds something is overdue, it's going to send a notification. Now this can take a few minutes. I just noticed it's already sent the email to me, so let me move things around so you can see what it sent me here. Okay, here's the message. And it gives you the name of the task list, the fact that it was due at some particular date and time and that we've gone past that. It also attached a PDF report of the task list, which I'll open up here in a minute and show you. And it also tells us that it's going to check tomorrow at this time to see if it's done. And if it's not done, it's going to send another message to us. Okay, now here is the detailed report that it sent. Now remember, I've only got a couple of tasks in there. One of the tasks is marked as completed, but the key point here is that the task list itself is not marked as completed, and that's why it sent this notification. The status of the individual tasks is not relevant here. It checks to see whether the task list as a whole has been marked as completed. If the task list is not marked as completed and it's past the due date, it's going to send you a notification. So, like the message said, it's going to check again tomorrow at this time, and if it's not completed, it's going to send me another message. Now I'm going to remove my email address here, because if there's no email address, it won't send a message, because it doesn't have anybody to send a message to. But before you delete the email address, remember that the reason it keeps sending this message to you is to make sure that the task gets done. It doesn't want to let this task fall through the cracks. Okay, now let's assume that we've just finished this event and that there was a problem that we want to address by changing our list of tasks here a bit. Let's suppose that maybe people were tripping over some speaker wire. So what we want to do is go back to the definition and add a task where we cover the speaker wire so that people won't trip on it. Okay, let me save that. Now we've got the new step in there. And if we save the whole thing, now let's go back and add another outside event. Outside event. Open it up and notice that this time we have the new step in there. So again, this is one of the advantages of putting things in a definition. You can modify the definition and that will apply to all future instances. Okay, now let's add a recurring task list. Remember that we said in order to close a financial period, we have to have a task list and we have to close a task, in this case each month, in order to close the financial period monthly. Now I've already put together the definition for a monthly task list. Let's just have a look at it. It's got 10 tasks in it and some other things. Let's go through it a bit. It's monthly, as we said. Now the epic on the monthly cycle here is it's on the first of the month, so this one starts at midnight on the 1st. It also has a pre-due date. Now you can use this as sort of a pre-check to make sure that everything's looking good for being totally completed by the end of the month. Now maybe we don't want to look at this at 9 in the morning. Let's just change that to 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Now the due date is showing here that it's the 28th of the month, which means that it's the end of the month, the last day of the month, as we discussed earlier. Now it's currently set to the 28th. We'll set it here to the 31st. It really doesn't matter whether it's the 28th, the 29th, 30th, or 31st. It's all going to have the same effect on a monthly recurring task list. It's going to make the due date the last day of the month. And instead of making it 9 a.m., let's set it to in the afternoon. Let's again set it to 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Now let's suppose that there's a couple of people that we want to notify if the books aren't closed by 2 in the afternoon. I think in the last example I just used one email address. You can put in as many email addresses as you like. Just comma separate them. I'll type in a few example ones here just so you get the idea. But we won't save those. Now remember that you can have due dates on the individual tasks as well as the task list as a whole. You know, I'll change this due date on this first task here to the 28th just to show that when we create an instance of this task list that all the dates that are 28th and greater will be mapped to the end of the month. We'll set it to 2 p.m. here just like all the others. Save that. Okay, now let's go create an instance of this. Now in this case, when you add an instance, the start date is actually relevant here. The way this works is that it will create an instance, the closest instance where the start date has not yet arrived. So the end of November has not yet arrived, and that's the current month. So it will create this instance on November 1st. So the first thing to notice here is that it did indeed snap the due date to the end of the month, November 30th. And then down here at the very first task, the one that we set to the 28th in the definition, notice that it got moved to November 30th, the last day of the month as well. So we can edit this one and just mark it as complete. And we can also mark the entire task list as complete here. Save that. And it shows as complete in the list. Now, one last thing I want to go through before we're finished. Let me first delete this task list that is there so we have a clean slate. Okay, so since it's recurring and we go and add this now, instead of creating it on the start or today's date, let's say that we created it back on January 12th. So this is creating it sort of back in time. Since it's recurring, what's going to happen is it will actually save all the instances between January and now. So I have to change my view range here, but once I change it, you can see that it's created all those instances. And also note the end dates of each one of them. Again, just that whole thing about as long as you have something 28 or greater, it's always going to create the instance where it's due on the last day of the month there. Okay, I think that covers everything about task list. Hope this has been informative and enlightening. As always, leave me comments and suggestions below and I'll do my best to accommodate.